Ben Poulose here from Ohio State. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank SAGES for the opportunity to present on post-market surveillance of biomaterials. These are my disclosures. The real problem in the United States is the lack of a post-market surveillance system that is effective. This note was handed to me about 3 years ago when the AHS performed a patient engagement activity involving the FDA to hear directly from patients in terms of what did they perceive as the big problems in terms of hernia repair and meshes in general. A patient advocate I was sitting next to handed me this note that simply asked, what is an acceptable complication rate for mesh products and hernia surgery long-term? The fact that none of us can really answer that question should really be a wake-up call to this very issue in terms of post-market surveillance of these products and also the techniques we use for hernia repair. The topics today really are threefold: how we arrived at this situation, what have we tried to do about it, and where we need to go. We'll first concentrate on how we arrived at this situation. The issues we face every day as hernia surgeons include these main two issues in terms of inguinal and ventral hernia repair. In inguinal hernia repair, debilitating chronic growing pain remains a problem. In ventral hernia repair, the issue of long-term catastrophic complications is something that we are just beginning to scratch the surface on. The system we currently exist in does not support our patients' well-being in terms of its lack of adequate post-market surveillance. This is a patient I saw at the beginning of my time here at Ohio State. He was a 22-year-old healthy man who underwent open right inguinal hernia repair for an asymptomatic inguinal hernia back in 2016 in Springfield, Ohio. He was a healthy construction worker. Prior to this, underwent a plug and patch mesh repair using polypropylene mesh, and post-operative day number 1, developed unremitting chronic groin pain. He lost his job and now is on chronic opioids. Unfortunately, this scenario has happened at an alarmingly high frequency, and oftentimes these patients have very little recourse for the rest of their lives. How often does this happen? If you calculate that approximately 750,000 inguinal hernia repairs are done per year, and we see approximately a 10 to 15% chronic groin pain rate over 20 years, assuming on the low side, a 10% chronic groin pain rate, that's over 1.5 million people with chronic groin pain. Just to put this in perspective, the Columbus metro area is about 1.9 million people. In terms of ventral hernia repair, long-term catastrophic complications are the issue that currently we are just beginning to understand. This is also a patient that was referred to me at Ohio State. She was a 43-year-old woman who underwent C-section for her 5th son in 2010. There was a missed colotomy experienced during that operation. She underwent ileocecal resection and ultimately developed an incisional hernia. This was repaired via AWR techniques here at Ohio State in 2011 using polyester mesh, external oblique myofascial release, and she did well for several years. In March of 2018, she began having fevers, worsening abdominal pain, and fatigue. Here is her CT scan, which shows a large anterior abdominal wall abscess dissecting the layers of her abdominal wall. I took her to the operating room to excise this mesh, and this is what I found. Here's the polyester prosthesis intimately involved with the abdominal wall in some areas, well incorporated, but in several other areas, completely free-floating in purulence. And this was then removed, and she ultimately recovered. How often does this happen? If you assume approximately 1 million ventral hernia repair operations done per year in the US, with about a 5.6 mesh-related complication rate requiring excision at 5 years, this is data from our Danish population, over 20 years, and if we assume that we are like healthy Danes and 80% of repairs use mesh, that's almost 500,000 people with mesh-related complications needing surgical intervention. The one problem with this assumption is these are healthy Danes. You can only wonder what our population rate would be here in areas such as Central Ohio or Middle Tennessee or other areas. We have rampant issues in terms of large amounts of comorbidities and also obesity. So what is the surveillance system here in the United States currently? Well, it's really comprised of 3 areas. Number 1, our industry partners and the 510K process. Number 2, MedWatch and MOD. And then finally, us as surgeons. Regarding the industry and the 510K process, our meshes and most of our hernia-related devices are Class 2 devices, which just require pre-market notification and don't necessarily require preclinical data for clearance. This uses the predicate device concept using the 510K clearance process. This is contrasted with Class 3 devices that require pre-market approval, which often requires clinical data. These are devices such as defibrillators, AICDs, and other such devices used in medicine and interventional techniques. The interesting thing about our 510K clearance process is that the idea of a predicate device creates an interesting scenario. Here is a map described of several other meshes that use mersaline or polypropylene-based mesh as its original predicate device. And this is the lineage of all the subsequent meshes that were related to that device in the chain of 510K clearances. The yellow spots indicate where the offspring was actually a recall device, and the red spots indicate where a device was actually recalled from the market. If you look at this, all of us know that many of these meshes are marketed in terms of their differences between one versus the other, and several of us have preferences for one versus the other. But from a clearance process, they're all the same in terms of going back to the original predicate device. This concept and this mesh was originated in 1976, and here at the conclusion of this study was 2015. So if you can imagine what happened in 1976, this is the era where the first Apple computer was developed. This was the very first Honda CBCC, and here on the bottom right of the screen is the very first caller ID box, allowing you to identify who was calling before you even picked up the phone. And this is the process we ascribe to clear our hernia meshes to this day in 2020. MedWatch and MAUDE are the FDA's answers to post-market surveillance. MedWatch is the FDA safety and information and adverse event reporting program that you and I are expected to use when adverse events are occurring. And MAUDE is the manufacturer and user facility device experience system that manufacturers are required to use when they're informed of a potential issue with their device. MedWatch, one of the issues with that is completely voluntary. It's not really used at all, and it's very difficult to obtain and interpret data. MAUDE is listed as mandatory. However, our industry partners don't have to report it if they don't know about it. And most institutions don't even know that this exists. All of these are ineffective at best and completely ignored at worst. So we have this mess of mesh, essentially, where we have many patients, regulatory lapses. We ignored it as surgeons, just continued on. And also our patients now have a great amount of misplaced trust in terms of the medical legal aspects we now see today. So what if we try to do about it? When I began my practice in Vanderbilt, when you have a material scientist who you're about to do a hernia operation on, this is the question you get. This is a patient that I had early on in my practice. This patient asked, so what's the long-term effect of placing petrochemical derived meshes in the abdominal wall? Certainly, I nor anyone else can answer this to any effective or solid answer, and that's a problem. At this time, several of us got together and realized, well, it might be beneficial if we got surgeons together to work from a common angle and improve the quality of what we do, and at the same time lay the groundwork for post-market surveillance. Thus, the American Hernia Society Quality Collaborative, which was born, which has now reinvented itself into the Abdominal Core Health Quality Collaborative. However, even this was not enough in terms of serving the goal of post-market surveillance. Only a small fraction of surgeons participate in this, and therefore only a small fraction of products used across the country are included in the ACHQC. In addition, this is entirely funded by industry, and although currently it's sustainable, this certainly makes it somewhat difficult to navigate the issues in terms of conflict of interest and also how we approach our relationships with industry in this space. And it really relies on excellent governance and transparency. And this is something that we have to continue to rely on until we have a more robust method of funding post-market surveillance efforts. Where we need to go really is something that the ACHQC has also partnered with the FDA in their program for Medical Device Epidemiologic Network. This is MD-EpiNet. This is a global public-private partnership that seeks to advance the collection and use of real-world data to improve patient outcomes. The foundation of MD-EpiNet are coordinated registry networks, which include currently orthopedic vascular, abdominal core health, women's health, neurovascular, and breast coordinated registry networks. The abdominal core health CRN model really involves surgeons, industry, hospitals, the FDA, payers, with patients at the center in terms of the idea of post-market surveillance. This abdominal core health CRN data model includes data from clinical registries, of which the ACHQC is the lead data registry, administered data, patient-reported outcomes, and also questionnaires. One example of this is integrating data sets where we can link data sources from registries and administrative data and develop infrastructure for the evaluation of devices. This reduces the complexity, time, and cost of everyone doing this on their own and improves data completeness and quality, including long-term follow-up. We did a pilot linkage evaluation where we linked our QC registry with New York State all payers data, and we evaluated the linkage and long-term performance and the feasibility of doing this. And we use a validated sequential linkage algorithm with indirect patient identifiers to minimize privacy issues. Our linkage was a success. Out of 737 New York State patients identified from the QC registry, we were able to match up to 88% of these patients on these indirect identifiers. Post-market surveillance of devices really split up into passive surveillance and active surveillance. Passive surveillance is pretty much what we're doing now. We wait for events to occur and we accrue data as it occurs on a voluntary basis. Active surveillance, however, has key attributes. It's timely, it has repeated assessments, and it's methodologically appropriate. This information is courtesy of Dr. Fred Resnick at the Leahy Clinic, who's an interventional cardiologist and leads one of the areas in terms of active post-market surveillance in the cardiology space. Automated surveillance take things even further, where we extend active surveillance by leveraging software tools which have pre-specified repeated evaluations of accruing data. This enables real-time prospective evaluation of accruing experience, monitoring of multiple devices and outcomes simultaneously, and application of robust data security protocols for remote data monitoring. And here's the concept. We move from a system of retrospective single device studies all the way to automated surveillance that's occurring in near real time. It's routine and it's continuous. This is the goal that the abdominal core health CRN works towards. The task list is broad and it is ambitious. We hope to identify, develop, and harmonize outcomes for surveillance, identify and integrate data sets, and define what are acceptable short and long-term complications for different clinical scenarios. Our ultimate goal is to have real impact for patients. So we can answer this question: what is an acceptable complication rate? So in summary, we talked about how we arrived at this situation in terms of our lack of effective post-market surveillance, especially in the United States. What do we try to do about it at the ACHQC, and where we need to go in terms of this concept of coordinated registry networks via the Abdominal Core Health Coordinated Registry Network under the MD EpiNet group. Many thanks go to several stakeholders involved in this process. As you might imagine, this is a massive, massive undertaking, but one that is highly important to our practices and ultimately to our patients. Thank you.